The envelope was sitting on the wrong side of the table. That was the first thing Adrian noticed when she walked into the Whitfield Grand Ballroom that evening, not the champagne towers, not the 120 guests in formal wear, not her husband standing near the center of the room with his hand resting on another woman's lower back. The envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, embossed with the Orville Group's gold seal, sitting in front of the chair that was supposed to be hers. She knew that seal better than she knew her own handwriting. She had designed it. Adrienne Voss, 37-year-old wife of Callum Voss and silent founder of the Orville Group, stood in the doorway of a party that her husband had organized to celebrate what he called the most important business partnership of his career. She was wearing a charcoal dress she'd bought on sale 3 months ago. Her hair was pinned back the way Callum preferred. Simple, he always said, understated. Nothing that would make people look at her instead of him. She had driven herself there because Callum said he needed to arrive early to greet the guests. She had parked 2 blocks away because the valet fee seemed unnecessary. She stood in that doorway for exactly 4 seconds before Callum saw her. He did not wave. He did not cross the room. He turned back to the woman beside him, Paige, 29, his assistant, in a red dress that cost more than Adrian's monthly grocery budget, and continued talking. Adrian walked to her seat and sat down. The envelope stayed where it was. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back 18 months. You have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon in February when Callum Voss came home from work and announced, with the particular energy of a man who has convinced himself of something, that he had identified the next great opportunity in commercial real estate consulting. He had a name for it. He had a pitch deck. He had 3 potential investors and a vision. What he did not have was Adrian's money, though he did not know that yet. He knew she had some savings. He knew she had worked, before they married, in some kind of brand consulting capacity that she never talked about in much detail. He knew she drove a 7-year-old Honda and clipped coupons from the Sunday Circular and packed her own lunch on the days she went into the city. He had, over the course of their 6-year marriage, assembled a portrait of his wife that was so thoroughly wrong it bordered on art. Adrian let him believe it, not out of cruelty, not, at first, out of strategy. She let him believe it because she had spent the better part of a decade watching what happened to women when the men in their lives understood their full dimensions. She had watched it happen to her mother. She had watched it happen to her closest friend, and she had decided quietly and without ceremony that she would build her empire first and let the world catch up later. The Orville Group was not a brand consulting firm, though that was how it appeared on paper to anyone who didn't look closely enough. It was a holding company. Adrian had started it at 26 with $40,000 she'd saved during 4 years of 90-hour work weeks, a real estate license she'd earned at night, and a clarity of vision that most people spend their whole careers trying to locate. By the time she married Callum at 31, Orville held 7 commercial properties in 3 states. By their 3rd anniversary, it held 22. By the night of the Whitfield Grand event, the Orville Group's portfolio was valued at just under $400 million, and Adrian sat on its board as its founding majority shareholder under a name most people in that ballroom would recognize immediately. That name was not Adrienne Voss. She had used her mother's maiden name for the company from the beginning, a precaution she'd taken without fully understanding why at the time, and understood completely now. The name on the Orville Group's founding documents, its press releases, its board letterhead, and the cream-colored envelopes on every table in that ballroom was A. Renfield. Her middle name was Renfield. Her mother's name was Annette. A. Renfield was a person Callum had never asked about. She found out about Paige 11 months into the marriage, which meant she found out about Paige 5 years before that night at the Whitfield Grand. She didn't find out through a text message or a receipt or a phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter. She found out the way perceptive people usually find out, through accumulation. The way a man stops mentioning someone's name right around the time he starts mentioning them too much. The way his stories about work began to star a cast of generic colleagues who never seemed to have faces. The way he started caring about his appearance again in a manner that had nothing to do with her. She had made a decision then. Not to leave, not yet. Not because she was afraid or dependent or without options. She made the decision the way a chess player makes a decision 3 moves before the move that matters, deliberately, quietly, and with full understanding of the geometry of what was coming. She hired a private investigator named Dwight. Dwight was 61, retired from the Atlanta PD, and had a particular gift for documentation that Adrian came to deeply appreciate. For 14 months, Dwight produced reports, photographs, bank records subpoenaed through legal channels Adrian's attorney coordinated, hotel folios, The kind of evidence that does not leave room for interpretation. She kept all of it in a fireproof box in the back of her home office closet under a shelf of binders labeled with property addresses. She waited. The reason she waited was the Whitfield Grand, not the building itself. Though the Whitfield Grand was, in fact, one of Adrian's properties, acquired 4 years ago through Orville's hospitality acquisition arm and renovated at a cost that would have made Callum's head swim if he'd ever looked at the Orville portfolio closely enough to find it. She waited because she had learned through the network of people who operated at the level she operated at, that the Whitfield Grand Gala was the event where the Orville Group would be announced as the lead investor in the Meridian Tower redevelopment project, the largest commercial real estate deal in the city's history. She had learned 6 weeks before the event that Callum had somehow gotten himself invited as a prospective consulting partner. She had learned 4 weeks before the event that Callum had begun telling his clients, his colleagues, and apparently anyone in the vicinity of a cocktail party that he was on the verge of landing the Meridian deal, that he had an in with the Orville Group's people, that A. Renfield's organization had expressed real interest in his vision. She had learned 2 weeks before the event that Callum had told his father this story. His father, Douglas Voss, 68, retired architect, had called Adrian to discuss it personally. Not to include her, to inform her, in the tone of a man presenting a verdict, that Callum was on the cusp of something extraordinary, that the Orville Group was the gold standard of commercial development, that A. Renfield was. And this was the word he used, the word she kept coming back to afterward, a visionary. "You probably don't follow this world much," Douglas had said gently, the way you'd say it to someone who'd never learned to drive. "But this is a very big deal, for the family." Adrienne had thanked him and gotten off the phone and sat with it for a long moment. Then she called her attorney and confirmed the timeline for the Meridian announcement. Then she called the Whitfield Grand's event coordinator, who reported to her and confirmed her seat assignment. Then she sat back down and let another 2 weeks pass. The dinner was served at 7. Adrienne ate her salmon. She drank half a glass of wine. She watched Callum work the room with the comfortable authority of a man who has mistaken access for ownership, and she watched Paige follow him at a distance that was intimate enough to be deliberate and public enough to be a provocation. Paige knew she was there. Paige looked at her twice across the room, each time with the particular expression of a woman who has decided she has already won. At the table to Adrian's left sat Douglas and Miriam Voss, Callum's parents. Douglas was in his element. He had been holding court for 40 minutes about the Meridian project, about Callum's relationship with the Orville Group, about what this partnership would mean for the family's name. Miriam, who had never been warm to Adrian and had stopped pretending somewhere around year 2, had not spoken directly to her once. At 7:45, the lights dimmed. A woman Adrian recognized, her own director of communications, Tamara, 44, took the stage. "Good evening," Tamara said. "On behalf of the Orville Group and our founding chair, A. Renfield, thank you for joining us tonight. We're honored to make a formal announcement regarding the Meridian Tower project, and we're grateful to have so many of our partners and colleagues here to share in this moment." Adrienne did not look at Callum during this part. She watched Tamara. "Before I hand over to our legal team for the formal partnership disclosure, I'd like to introduce someone. The Orville Group has always been led by a person who believes that what you build matters less than why you build it. That principle is why we're here tonight, and I'm honored to say that for the first time at a public event, our founding chair has agreed to be introduced by her full name." Adrienne picked up her water glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the founder and majority chair of the Orville Group, Adrian Renfield Voss." The room responded the way rooms respond to surprises that are also confirmations of something they could not have named, but somehow feel they already knew. A sharp intake of collective breath, a moment of recalibration, and then applause that built unevenly as people processed the information in real time. Adrienne stood. She smoothed her charcoal dress, the one on sale, the understated one, and walked to the stage, and she did not look at Callum until she was at the microphone. Then she looked. He was standing very still. She had thought about this moment a great deal. She had expected to feel something clean and decisive. What she actually felt was more complicated and quieter than she'd prepared for. She felt the strange exhaustion of arriving somewhere you've been walking toward for years. "Thank you," she said. "I don't usually do this. Most of you in this room know my name from documents and wire transfers and the occasional email signed with my initials. I prefer it that way. I built this company in private because I believe that the work should speak before the person does." She paused. "Tonight, the work is ready." She spoke for 9 minutes about the Meridian project, about Orvel's vision for the development, about what it would mean for the city's East Corridor. She was precise and unhurried. She had given presentation like this for 11 years. When she was done, she returned to her seat. Douglas Voss had not moved. His face had the particular rigidity of a man who has said a great many things he cannot unsay. Miriam was looking at the tablecloth. Callum was looking at Adrian. She sat down, placed her napkin back in her lap, and picked up her fork. He came to her at the end of the night, after the formal program was over and the room had broken into clusters. She was speaking with Orvel's lead attorney, Gordon, when she felt Callum's hand on her elbow. Light, careful, the touch of a man who is no longer sure of his permissions. She excused herself from Gordon and turned. Callum's face was doing several things at once. There was disbelief, which she had expected. There was calculation, which she had also expected. There was something underneath both of those things that she had not expected to feel anything about and did anyway. A flicker of the man she had married, momentarily visible, before it went back under. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "It wasn't really a question." "Tell you what?" "Any of it, all of it." He gestured vaguely at the room, at Tamara, at the banner with the Orvel Group's logo, as if the question encompassed the entire last decade of her life. She considered several answers. She had prepared several answers. What she said instead was the simplest one, because simplicity had a weight that prepared answers rarely did. "You never asked." He opened his mouth. "You told me about your pitch deck," she said. "You told me about your 3 investors. You told me that this was the most important opportunity of your career." She kept her voice level. She was not interested in performing anger in a room full of people who would watch. "You did not ask me once what I thought. You did not ask me once what I knew about this industry. You did not ask me once about my work, Callum. In 6 years, I didn't know. I know you didn't know." She straightened slightly. "That was a choice you made every day." He was quiet. "I'll have Gordon reach out to your attorney next week," she said. "I think we both know this has been over for a while." She said it without satisfaction and without cruelty, which was harder than either. She turned back toward Gordon, who had the professional grace to appear deeply interested in his phone. The morning after Douglas Voss called, she let it go to voicemail, which she had never done before. She'd listened to it twice. He said that he'd had no idea, that he hoped she understood he'd always respected her, that the family had always considered her. She deleted it. There were things she could have said to Douglas. She had thought about those things too, in the months of preparation that preceded the night at the Whitfield Field Grand. She could have replayed for him the conversation they'd had 2 weeks earlier, where he had explained the Orvel Group to her as though she were a child who'd stumbled into a conversation about electricity. She could have pointed out that in 6 years of family dinners, holiday visits, birthday calls, and Sunday lunches, he had never once asked her what she did with her days beyond the vague sense that it was some kind of business thing. She could have said all of that. She had decided not to, not because he didn't deserve it, because she was finished spending her energy on people who had only become curious about her once they understood what she was worth to them. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Callum did not contest it. His attorney made some initial posturing about community property and contribution claims that went away quickly once Gordon produced the Orvel Group's corporate structure documentation, which made clear that every asset in question predated the marriage by years and had been maintained entirely separately from any marital finances. The prenuptial agreement Adrian had quietly insisted on, which Callum had signed 6 weeks before their wedding, with the breezy confidence of a man who didn't think it would ever apply to him, was clear. He left with what he came with. Paige had ended things with him, it turned out, about 2 weeks after the Whitfield Grand. Dwight had confirmed this with his usual efficiency. Adrian did not find this particularly satisfying. She had stopped wanting Callum's relationships to hurt him somewhere around the 14th month of Dwight's reports. But she noted it. The Meridian Tower groundbreaking happened 8 months after the divorce. Adrian stood at the front of the small ceremony in a hard hat and steel-toed boots, which she had remembered to bring herself, and watched the first equipment move earth on a project that would take 4 years and reshape the east side of the city. She did not invite the Voss family. There were things that stayed with her from that night, not the applause, not Tamara's introduction, not even the look on Callum's face when he understood. What stayed with her was the moment just before, when she had been sitting at the table alone, watching the room, the cream envelope in front of her still unopened, and she had thought, "I have been in this room 1,000 times and no one has ever known it." That thought had not made her sad. She wanted to be clear about that, with herself if no one else. It had not made her sad. What it had made her was certain, in a way that she had not let herself be certain before, about what she had built, about what she had protected, and about the specific kind of loneliness that comes from sharing a life with someone who has never been curious about you. Adrian had learned, early in her career, a principle from a woman named Octavia, who had mentored her briefly at 24, who wore the same 2 suits in rotation and drove a paid-off sedan, and had quietly assembled a real estate portfolio worth more than anyone in her social circle could have imagined. Octavia had said it to her over coffee in a conference room that smelled like old carpet and printer toner, and it had lodged somewhere permanent. "Baby," Octavia had said, "people will always underestimate the quiet ones. Let them. The quiet ones are usually the ones who are actually doing the work." Adrienne had built an empire on that principle. She had also, she now understood, built a marriage on it, which was the mistake, not the silence itself. The silence was strategy, and strategy was fine. The mistake was expecting someone who had never tried to know her to eventually arrive at knowing her on his own, without curiosity, without asking, without the basic human effort of wondering who was sitting across from him at dinner every night for 6 years. She was done making that mistake. The year after the Meridian groundbreaking, a profile ran in a commercial real estate trade publication. A long one with photographs taken at the Whitfield Grand property, which was fully Adrian's by then. The writer asked her, near the end of a 2-hour interview, whether she thought she would have built differently if the people in her life had known from the beginning who she was. She thought about it for a long moment. "I think I built exactly the way I needed to," she said finally. "When you know that no one's watching, you build for the right reasons. You build because the work is worth building, not because someone's going to see it." The writer asked if she had any regrets. She looked out the window at the east side of the city, where the Meridian scaffolding was visible 6 blocks away against the late afternoon sky. "I regret the years I spent hoping someone would ask," she said. "I don't regret a single thing I built while I was waiting."